Ailbhe.
2!
I
Yay!
know! Number 2.
How exciting.
I'm liking the single digits that are happening in
Seriously.
weeks to come.
I know, I'm laughing because that also means that there will also be the late 30s that are going to come as well. So,
Yeah.
I have big news about this one.
What's that?
This is actually one I learnt before.
Oh my gosh! What?
So this may seem like a small thing to many people, but it's actually a very big thing for me in comfort levels. Turns out take 2 is much more comfortable than take 1.
Yeah, well, I've also played this one.
Nice.
And I think it's important to point out that just because it's number 2, just because it's one of the early ones, and this one you could say is maybe a little less challenging than some of the others, but just because it's an early one doesn't mean it's not a challenging one. There's definitely some in the first 10 that are quite tricky.
Yeah.
And I was thinking for this one, I mean, it's all about the bow, isn't it? I mean, well, there's some other things, but there's just so much incredible work you can do with your bow control and your bow distribution and string crossings and all of that. It's I'd say if you took a week off of playing or something in the summer and you wanted to come back and really find your legato and that control and stuff, this would be such an excellent study to come back to.
Absolutely. And then throw in some kind of big shifting areas. I find this is a great study. It actually was a study I learned during college for my backwards shifting. Funnily enough, that everyone practices shifts going up, right? But I'm not sure everyone actually gives the same attention to their backwards shifting, because we kind of think, we're coming back to that comfortable fetal position, happy days, my body will naturally do it. But often you'll find if you are shifting up here, it's the backwards shifts that really pose a problem to people. So there's no harm giving yourself a little bit of thought for any of that. How am I going to approach that? If I'm doing my circular shifts, is it exactly the same backwards as forwards? Am I doing the same motion? And really fixating into that. I love that.
Great points. I mean, some of those shifts are really quite big shifts backwards too. And you're also, it's that whole thing of fighting against gravity. I think if you're not used to it, you've never isolated your backward shifts. A lot of times you'll find, even in scales I'll find that you tend to always want to be a little bit sharper than where you're aiming, because you have to, even though you might be going back to a place that's psychologically more comfortable, as you say, it's that resistance against gravity as well.
Yeah, exactly. So it is actually adding that touch of different feel. When we're going up and when we're going back, you almost have to weightlift a little.
Yeah. So since we're talking about shifts, should we talk about that area that has the kind of tricky shifts? I mean, you've just talked about the backwards ones. Did you have any approaches in bar 9 for this?
So this was actually one I did with Steve Doan, and he's big into that idea of, let's see where, so that you actually move your head, so that you're shortening. So this is a classic case of, it's an octave and a tone. So, and by actually shortening that muscle just a little bit, it makes this distance seem a tiny bit shorter in your arm.
Yeah.
So this study for me was really fascinating, because if you go to the next line, so let's say, if you did this in slow motion, thinking about your backward shifts and where your head would go. So I remember learning this at the beginning, just being totally head melted, that they were just, it's totally ridiculous to think at the speed that you're going to play it that you're going to be like, but at least thinking about that muscle and the freedom with your neck while it goes is actually no bad thing to practice. So similarly with that, I think taking the time, realizing that just to glide, make sure that your shift is circular, And then try not to waste too much bow while you're at it. That was the big thing for this study in general, was even in bar 6 we have... So even there, you could actually suddenly speed up because suddenly you're left-handed, you're trying to mirror the same movement. But instead you really have to move and not let yourself, particularly in this one actually, I practiced that in the wrong bow, so it was completely useless. Yes. Did you notice that? But yeah, so let's imagine we did it the right way around. So then, that one, for whatever reason, always seems to be the place where you want to go, you know, the bow is like going wild. But having to practice that. Here, there's so many links in your shifts in that whole section. You really have to be quite careful that the bow is just going at a consistent speed and it's never interrupted. I think that's the big challenge for me in this piece is, can you not let anything interfere with your legato? Be it string crossings, be it shifts. Changes of bow speed, and sometimes you want to change the bow speed to help the musicality and the harmonic structure, but I think that's the real challenge.
Yeah, I mean, what you've said is just right on the money. And it's that thing, right, of sometimes it's just a little bit of conscious thinking about why something's difficult, you know, as you just pointed out. That's a classic example. We always want to use a lot of bow because, as you've said, it mirrors the left hand. I think another thing that happens, you know, you might think, okay, it's marked piano for nearly a page. So that should be quite easy because I need to fit a lot of notes in a bow. Actually, I find places where you do the big shift. I found myself, I really have to, in bar 9, try not to crescendo up to that top note. It's really easy to... Also because that's the first place in the study where we have 2 bows in 1 bar. So it's sort of a moment of relaxation where you're like, okay, I can be a bit more free with this, but actually you need to temper that with the dynamic that you're in as well. I mean, naturally there'll be some phrasing up to that, but again, like, how do you create phrasing, how do you create direction without necessarily changing the dynamic massively? So it's... I think that's a great thing to be aware of, and I definitely cheat and play at least an NP from the beginning, because, like, what is your piano? This comes back to me just throwing all the rule books out the window. So piano is only relative to something else. So this only does go up to 40. So if I just edge all of my dynamics up 1 level from what people might term, like piano today could be my PP tomorrow, depending on how I feel, right? It's about color and stuff, you know, that's the thing we always say. Dynamics are about color, not actual volume. Yeah. Color, emotion, where you are that day, it's so subjective. So for me, where you are that day, both physically and mentally. Where are you feeling today? If you're at the Claravale Village Hall, that's like a bathtub. You can play everything pianissimo, and it's still gonna sound very booming. Exactly. So, and that's why we always laugh, because, you know, piano means nothing until you're in a venue, and then you can find out what appears quiet to some people, even though you're actually playing MF. So, I definitely did all of this first page just for a little bit more comfort at kind of a healthy MP. You can't play it super loudly or else you physically don't have enough. But this is another great one if you're going to be really nerdy about it, where you can do 2 bars to a bow. So you start to go. So obviously my string crossings were terrible at the beginning, but because that's not where we've practiced it. So here, are you using a little bit of fingers and wrist, or are you using your full arm for that string crossing? So I think about this more as if I was doing a whole bow on 1 string, this opening and closing from the arm that happens when you pronate, I sort of work that in. So I guess for the first 3 notes, I know you would probably, I'm guessing, take the approach where you do a lot of that with your wrist. Is that right? This thing with the fingers.
Yeah, I mean, this is interesting because it's like the Bach prelude again, right?
Yes.
So if you watch my elbow, I'm actually using I'm using the arm, but then a feeling of actually, so I read somewhere where they actually feel like you're pouring water into each finger, and then into the first finger. So you actually pour it like a kettle. So what I'm trying to do is get up to the level of the A string with my elbow. We can't see it there. So, and here I am. And here is the point where I use a little bit of finger action. I should really sit back further, shouldn't I?
No, it's okay. Well.
You know what I'm.
It's good to demonstrate. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think you've explained it very well again. I mean, another thing, it's these moments where our approaches to technique are really highlighted, because I think, oh gosh, these things Ailbhe practices for, like legato. I need to do that. I need to do this 2 bars to a bow thing more often. Of course, what I did immediately, I was like, this is a stoppy starty bow study without a doubt. Totally
nice.
Stocky starty bow.
I should have done that.
I know. And so then the other thing about this too, this is another technique I love to do, but I'm sure you do as well, is the left or the right arm without the left hand. So you just practice the string crossings, and that is especially helpful, I would say, like places like 25 and 26, where you have this tricky chromatic string crossing passage. And what you find when you do it with just the bow is that the pattern repeats the whole time. When you break things down like that, you can sort of consciously put all your energy to where you need it, because that sort of sets itself and go, and you practice that coordination. But there are quite a few moments in this where I found that when it was a little unclear, it was really because there was a tricky bow crossing either at the tip or a very fast one note on the A string type thing. So just isolating that bow. Really
I love all of that, and I think that's a great way to practice everything. I actually, even when I'm starting people off, I always say, so left hand first with just a little bit of pizzicato, then bow and open strings, and then kind of the way I would have approached piano playing piece. So hands separately.
Yeah.
So then I always know exactly, I have time to focus, with no bow in hand, where the balance of my left hand, I'm not really thinking about any of this, which is great. Now, funnily enough, I didn't use the barn writer for this one because I had all my markings in the other one. So it's really interesting to see the beginning here. In mine, that's a really interesting challenge. And that is what I meant with the using that. And obviously that cuts it out here. Beautiful. And of course, that's probably something that we would do more likely if we were playing the piece as an actual rep piece. So it's really fascinating for me to see what's similar and what's completely different.
However, I can see examples for both of that, like in the repertoire. I mean, Beethoven 5. That
yeah, exactly. I thought for a second. I thought for a second you were saying Beethoven's Fifth Sonata, and I was like, I should really recognize that bit because I've just recorded them, and it turns out you meant the symphony. Yeah,
the symphony, the famous orchestra excerpt.
I do know that too. I did recognize it, but not as quickly as I should have had I just recorded it.
Well, it's a little hard out of context. If I did, you would definitely know from those 3 notes, I'm sure. But I thought, if I was preparing Beethoven 5 for something, I would definitely practice this study, because it's also, I think, there's the tempo that the Bärenreiter edition suggests for this is quite fast. I mean, a lot faster than I would have naturally played it. So crotchet equals 88, I think. So it's really quite flowing. you know, pros and cons to doing that. But I think for sure, one thing you can do when you're working at that tempo is think about how you phrase with the bow. So, you know, really saving. I think you'd want to save regardless in this at the beginning. Stuff like that.
Yeah. And even for, say, Bach Prelude, right? Where do you want to end up? If you're doing that separate bow pattern, quite a lot of people practice and suddenly like they're off the end of the bow, so actually learning to save their that is the kind of area where that skill never gets old. You're absolutely crying laughing. Why is that?
No, I'm not. We're about to have a cameo, I think. Craig, are you coming through? Just, the Bach and the bow stuff. Yeah. Totally.
And another thing I notice about this is a great etude to think about something so basic as whenever you have an open string that you have to guard it in the sound. So no matter what you do, you have to really make sure the beginning is fine because there's a lot of open strings around there. So you have to actually almost lighten a bit on all your open strings, wherever they end up. And quite often here they'll end up in a very awkward semiquaver note where you really don't want to have an unintended accent musically.
Yes.
Yeah. Good to go through all of those.
Timbre and color and unity of sound throughout all of that, you know, I mean, making sure that your decisions about what notes speak and like the color between string crossings and stuff like that. It's interesting, you know, because I feel like nowadays, really, it depends on the rep you're doing, but perhaps more now, I mean, definitely more than in Popper's time, but like, perhaps more now, we wouldn't choose to do a fingering like... We wouldn't choose all that stuff up here in this region because it's so fluffy sounding. But I think about that, it's a great opportunity to practice seeing how much of a D string sort of sound you can achieve up there, and bringing your attention to the quality of sound, I guess, always, no matter what you're playing on what position.
Also in that area, especially when you're using the chance to do that, the coordination of when do you release for the shift and when do you not, in order to get a true note for every single note, just before you shift and when you arrive after the shift. So none of those notes end up cut off or hampered by the fact that you have all these mad shifts around it. And that's an interesting challenge in itself, I think. So quite often for me, I'd have to leave it a little bit later to shift in order to not, you know, one of Andre Navarre's 5 golden rules, never shorten a note before a shift. That's one.
Yes.
Or a trill, or, you know, there's 5 of them. We can Google those later.
Yeah, no, they're good. I've got to look those up myself.
That was written in Aisling Drury-Byrne's cello studio. They were up on the wall.
Oh,
and
right.
I mean, very good rules actually. Just never shorten a note before you're ready to do anything, like a string crossing, a trill, a shift, anything that involves a physical technique. Make sure that you don't upset the note beforehand, because then it will cry, and that'll be the end of that.
You'll make the note sad.
I know.
Oh, man.
Make me sad too, you know.
Yeah, we don't want to miss any opportunities to milk it. I mean, come on.
No, certainly not. I like it.
What else? Anything big?
Anything big?
There's some chromatics. You know, if you've not played a lot of repertory and you're approaching this, you might be a little thrown by reading those double sharps and things like that. It's a good opportunity to just get your head around reading notes that are a little less familiar.
Yeah, and I suppose the big thing about all the shifts is to make your decision what kind of shift it is. Mostly here it's going to be link shifts, right? So, 4th bar. For me, I don't really want anything to be too soupy unless they say, you know, did you slide up on your 4th or on your 2nd?
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, if you could define for us what your link shift is, what you mean by that.
Sure.
I would
Okay.
shift on the 2, so the old finger.
Yeah. Exactly, old finger, but then specifically getting down to the bolts of it. Where does your second finger last? Where does it end? So your link note is the F, so you're really only doing a perfect fourth. And then the later you leave it, then the more clear it is. So whenever you do a link shift, you're more likely going to be doing something like that for the classical Baroque era. And as we get into then, even still, any of those really romantic shifts for me, actually one here, that one, that's quite romantic, isn't it? The way they've asked us to do it. So we have to be quite careful about making the decision, is it a link note? Which finger? Is it old finger, new finger, old bow, new bow? Just to make sure that you know exactly what's happening, particularly around the area that we talked about earlier. So here. So if we're being really specific about it, so we have our first. So the link note is the B flat third finger, because we're sliding on the third finger, right? And then we slip in the first finger, perfect. Here, it's going to be a B flat link note. So that you know exactly, it's a perfect fit. Fourth finger. So that's going down from... Yeah, so there. Just deciding, and for me, it's always clearer. You just have to make a decision, but the link note really makes sure that all of that is very, very clear. And sometimes we can just chance our arms, and that's when a shift in a high pressure gig is going to actually go wrong. So, great idea to just make sure there is no decision you haven't made.
You know, it's interesting as you're talking about this, because I was just thinking about the way you explain it is so awesome, and I always think about it in terms of old finger, new finger, old bow, new bow. But of course, when we're doing a shift within a slur, this is a great opportunity to practice this, because a lot of times now in modern repertoire, if we want a shift to be really clean, we'll arrange the bowing. So, you know, for example, if we didn't want an audible shift there, we would change bows, wouldn't we? Most of the time. But I'm just realizing I can't think of an example off the top of my head where you would do a shift within a slur and shift on the new finger. I feel like you would almost always shift on the old finger in you know, contemporary style. You would never go. Well, I guess there. Let me just think.
Yeah, you never do it because you hear the link note. If you go, you're always going to hear it, unless the only way I do it is sometimes I do this other type of shift. So I do an actual rock where I'm not staying in the cello area. So I substitute in by actually rolling over onto the new finger. So it's almost like I'm still on the old finger. So if I want to sneak one in.
Sneaky shift.
And that'll work within the slur. But that means that your hand position goes out of position. So you have to adapt a lot of things for that to work. You also have to be already in transit. So you have to actually roll like you'd be doing a vibrato. And you're already going. So there's no stopping. So you never hear. So that's the only way you can do that within a slur, for it not to hear this. Nobody wants to hear that. So I think college students quite often won't make their decisions, and you'll hear this extraneous noise somewhere, or you'll feel like there's an actual extra note somewhere, and that's generally a poor decision made in shifting policy.
Yes, poor shift policy. Not allowed here.
Maybe we should put that up on our wall. Poor shift policy. Have you decided you're shifting? Okay, Ailbhe's on a tangent. Should we play this?
let's play this. I think it's my turn this week
Yay!
to go first. So out go me headphones. Here I go.
Take it away.
Woohoo! Beautiful.
Yay! Woo! Beautiful.
I might have taken a little too fast of a tempo at the beginning.
Oh, it was lovely. I thought it was beautifully flowing.
Hey,
Lovely.
cool.
Yay, go us. Popper 2.
Yeah.
Woohoo.
Sweet.
Popper
I'll see
3.
you next week. I know.
Yeah.
With our special
Exciting.
guest coming.
Special guest next week, so we will announce who that is this week. Very
I
excited.
know. Stay tuned. Right. See you soon.
See you.
Bye.